crazy.
Wild.
It's absolutely crazy.
I don't even know where to begin.
I cannot believe what we're seeing right now in Metairie, Louisiana. I mean, this is a boys basketball program that's made 3 straight state championship games. They won the 1A title last year. We've seen them send John Anderson to Tulane, Eddie Ludwig to LSU, and now maybe the best player they've ever produced in his senior season, possibly better than both of them. The run this program has had at the 1A level with barely 200 kids in the whole dang school is simply crazy.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. We've seen some great players come out of the New Orleans area. Randy Livingston, Kerry Kittles, had Greg Monroe just 2 years ago. But this kid, he's right up there with him.
100%.
Could be just as good.
100%.
I mean, his father leads Country Day to a state championship in 1977. Now, 32 years later, him and Ludwig paired together to win the 3rd basketball title in program history. First time since 1980. 1980 to 2009, never even made the finals. This kid is just different.
Consensus top 100 player in the country for the class of 2010. A dozen offers from D1 programs, including Greg Monroe's school in Georgetown.
UVA, Stanford, some of the top programs in the nation want this kid, and why wouldn't you? 6'7", he can play guard, he can play post. Country Day head coach Mike McGuire said on record, this is the best basketball player he has ever coached. Gatorade Player of the Year.
Yeah, I was about to say.
Louisiana Gatorade Player of the Year, and probably going to win it again this year.
Look, I know us in the media like to talk about projections and who will be this and how great is that. Let me tell you right now, this kid is different. If Eddie Ludwig and head coach Trent Johnson can convince him to stay home and go to LSU, the Tigers are going to be back in the Final Four in no time, baby.
Couldn't agree more.
Mark my words. I'm going to say it. Matt Derenbecker.
Remember the name.
Matt Derenbecker is going to be a name that will go down in Louisiana basketball history, and the fact that we get to witness it as it's unfolding is just unbelievable. Matt Derenbecker is going places, people, and if you're not interested or paying attention or whatever, well, you're just playing crazy because Matt Derenbecker is special. Special, special, special.
So my name is Trina Derenbecker. I am Matt's mother and taught at Country Day, which is how I know Hart, and have been an English teacher for a long time now. I'm in school administration and live in Hammond, Louisiana. He was born in Baton Rouge, but we moved to Hammond not long after that. My husband and I met at LSU Law School, but I did not stay at LSU Law School. I realized not long into it that my calling was more in English education. And so I dropped out of law school. He stayed in. We lived in Baton Rouge for a while. We lived in New Orleans for a while also before Matt was born. But we've always been in the triangle between New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and Hammond. But Matt went to school at Southeastern Lab School, actually, from kindergarten through 8th grade. And then he went to Ponchatoula High for 2 years. We had a Hammond address, but we were in the Ponchatoula School District. And then we decided to go back to John's, my husband's, alma mater, which was Country Day. I accepted a teaching job there. John, Matt's dad, was on a Country Day basketball team that won its first state championship in 1977, I believe. We decided to make that move before Matt's junior year.
Big news at the local high school level as Ponchatoula star Matt Derenbecker will be transferring to Metairie Park Country Day. The rising junior was a member of the All-State second team for the Green Wave last year and now joins senior 3-star prospect Eddie Ludwig, an LSU signee, to give Country Day a pair of 6'7" stalwarts. After coming up just short in the 1A state championship against Christian Life the past 2 years, head coach Mike McGuire and his staff will surely be hoping that Derenbecker is the final piece of the puzzle to handing the Cajuns their 3rd state championship in school history, and the first since 1980.
Matt's junior year was good. He was excited to be there. Academically, he did very well. His teachers were often coming to me and saying, oh, we enjoy having him in class. He participates. Matt was a talker, and Matt seemed to be willing to reach out and make friends with lots of people, including you. And so that was a good year. And then, of course, they had the great success in basketball, and they won the state championship that year.
And in local recruiting news, now that Country Day star Eddie Ludwig has committed to LSU after helping lead the Cajuns to their first state title since 1980, all eyes are on rising senior Matt Derenbecker and where his next destination will be. The reigning Louisiana Gatorade Player of the Year in basketball averaged 20.3 points and 11.3 rebounds as a junior and was MVP of the state championship game, scoring 31 points and hauling in 9 rebounds against Acadiana. Word is he's received offers from Wake Forest, Georgetown, Stanford, and the University of Virginia, as well as his parents' alma mater, LSU. All of New Orleans and many across the country will now wait and see what the 17-year-old will ultimately decide.
There began to be a whole lot of interest from colleges, calling a lot, sending tons of mail. And I worried even then that wasn't healthy, because certainly we had seen signs from Matt starting even when he was younger. And we attributed it to ADD, but decided not to medicate him. We talked to a lot of specialists and teachers, and he was having so much success in the classroom and not getting into trouble. You know, he was not a behavior problem at all. And so with their recommendations, we decided not to do medicine. But once he got to Country Day, probably the beginning of his senior year, we started trying medication because we were seeing changes in him. And I think it was partly that the mental illness was coming more to the forefront, and he was less able to handle what we now know was bipolar or manic depressive, but we did not know that then. He saw many specialists at between the end of his junior year and throughout his senior year, and that really never came into the conversation from the specialist. But Matt was also very intelligent and knew how to somehow manipulate conversations when he was talking to different psychiatrists and counselors. So I think he was trying to hide a lot of what he was experiencing, but we started seeing a lot more results. He did not want to be seen as having a problem, and he hated the way the medication made him feel. And so a lot of times he would not take it when I thought he was taking it, hide it under his tongue and later spit it out, that kind of thing. But I don't know that it really was what he needed anyway, you know. So his junior year was great looking back, comparing it to his senior year, because his senior year, things really went off the rails, and he was still functioning most of the time at a high level on the basketball court.
Well, most of Matt Derenbecker's senior year of high school has been nothing but smiles as he's established himself as one of the best players in the entire nation. The Country Day hoop star averaged 25.8 points, 10.2 rebounds, and 6 assists per game in leading the Cajuns back to the 1A state title game for the 4th straight year. A rare frown on the typically jovial Derenbecker's face came as the Cajuns came up just short of a repeat with a loss to Christian Life in the finals. But that frown has been turned upside down as the guard has made his highly anticipated college commitment. Derenbecker spurned offers to play in the ACC, Big East, and the Pac-10 to instead stay close to home in the SEC. Derenbecker will be attending his parents' alma mater and reuniting with former high school teammate Eddie Ludwig at LSU in the fall. And with that, one of the best high school players in the class of 2010 has made his decision. LSU will be happy to have landed this one, and Derenbecker has to be on top of the world right now.
He signed with LSU, but his behavior was more erratic. He was not doing as well in school. He was still passing, but he was not doing what he had done his junior year. You know, his grades, he was content with C's all of a sudden. I was also always uncomfortable with the attention that I felt he was getting from outside sources and online. At that point, that was all pretty new, but it was happening a lot. And I knew that he was getting on these sites that were either very critical of him or very positive. And so he was hearing all that, and I knew that was not healthy for any teenager to be hearing and reading. So senior year was rough for us as parents, for him. Socially, things went kind of downhill. He would seem to be having some good friends and doing all right, but then I could see that he had seemed to have more of a desire to fit into groups that were not good for him. He also, I think, began self-medicating a lot, drinking a lot. So we had a lot of bad times his senior year, hard times. And I was worried about how he would ever function at college because he wasn't functioning well in high school that year, his senior year.
Getting set for the upcoming season of LSU men's basketball, The Tigers looking to improve on last year's 11-20 mark and 2-14 record in SEC play. The addition of redshirt Justin Hamilton will certainly help, as will freshman Andre Stringer's addition. One name to keep an eye on, though, is local boy Matt Derenbecker. Not often you see freshmen coming in and contributing right away, but Matt Derenbecker is not your typical freshman. The former Country Day Cajun could see significant playing time in his first season.
He seemed to enjoy college at first. I have a memory of him when he was playing basketball in this little rec league when he was about 5, and the coach took him out for a while, and the coach was kneeling down on one knee with one leg propped up, and Matt went and sat on his knee. Like, I'm here, coach, I'm ready to go back in whenever you want me. So he wasn't real happy with playing time, and the coaches were not happy with some of they found out about the drinking that he was doing even at college, or more at college. And so we had a meeting one time with the LSU coaches about that, and it didn't do any good to plead with him and try to reason with him. And I just had since the end of his junior year, I just had a sinking feeling in my gut that this was such a scary path that he was on, and I didn't see a lot of hope. And like I said, we saw so many different doctors, and they would kind of agree with him, and whatever he said, they kind of agreed with. We had some good doctors, and some of them tried to help, but we just never did get a good plan. At LSU, he also saw a counselor that the team recommended, but it was never helpful. They didn't even recommend medication at that point. When we were moving him out, we saw textbooks that the shrink wrap was never removed, so he had not even cracked his books. And I really think that he made nothing lower than a D at LSU, just because he was intelligent enough that if he went to class, he could absorb a lot. At the end of the season, he told us that he wanted to transfer. He wasn't happy.
Great draft for the Saints this past weekend. Moving on to our next story tonight, former high school star Matt Derenbecker has announced his intention to transfer from LSU. Derenbecker became a starter for the Tigers by the time SEC play rolled around and played in all 32 games this season, averaging 6.5 points and 2.1 rebounds per game. But the Tigers endured another frustrating 11-win campaign, including just 3 wins in SEC competition. There were rumors circulating that Derenbecker enjoyed the nightlife in Baton Rouge a little bit too much in his first year. Now the talk is he may have his eye on moving closer to home to join second-year head coach Ed Conroy at Tulane.
And so we did a lot of talking, but at that point, it's out of our control. He had to make that decision and live with whatever the repercussions were. But he did get a lot of interest from colleges, and he announced to us that he had decided he was going to University of Dayton. So we told him we would support him, but I remember really emphasizing to him that, Matt, if you continue to live the lifestyle you're living and not see the counselor regularly and try to get some help for what you're going through, it's going to be just a repeat of LSU. And he told me, Mom, I'm okay. I don't need that. I'm okay. Everything's good. Why do you think there's something wrong with me? There's nothing wrong with me. At Dayton, he seemed really happy at first, and the coaches were very nice to us, and we went to several games. He was doing well in classes, and we were hopeful, but then it didn't last. Socially, he seemed to like his teammates. He had a girlfriend and we met her. She was very sweet. In fact, she came to New Orleans between his junior and senior year and visited us. Nice girl from Missouri, from St. Louis, I think. And so we were pretty pleased with Dayton. We were never dissatisfied with Dayton as a school. And then at the end of the year, he came home from my oldest son's wedding. And then he said, I don't want to go back. And my oldest son told him, Matt, you need to go back and you need to finish this semester and you need to go ahead and graduate, because at the end of that year, he was only going to be, I think, 30 hours away from graduation. And he just said, I don't care about graduating in this, because I don't even remember what his final major was, maybe communications. But he just said, I don't care about it. And anyway, we told him, you're going back. And so that was in April. So he had to go back and take his exams and finish. And then in May, we got a call from the coaches saying that Matt had been hospitalized because they were worried that he was suicidal. And so my sister and I went. It was right as Country Day was ending. I missed the end of the year faculty things. So my sister and I flew up, and he got out of the hospital the next day, and we got a report that said they thought he was stable and recommended counseling. And for that week, we stayed a week. For that week, he had 2-a-day sessions with a good psychologist. He went to this counselor, and then the counselor met with us after and recommended that we do allow him to come back to Louisiana, because that's what he wanted, and find a counselor who he could see, or a psychologist he could see regularly. And he told us he was going to give us a recommendation on somebody in New Orleans. And so he did it, and we packed him up and moved him back.
Now here's a blast from the past for you.
Oh boy.
Former Country Day star and LSU player,
Kinda, sorta.
player Matt Derenbecker back in the news this week. After flaming out at LSU and sitting out a year at Dayton, he started 16 games last season and put up 6.5 points and 2.1 rebounds per game. Yes, well, anyway, I guess he's still partying a little too much up in Dayton.
Well, they party in Ohio?
Well, Matt Derenbecker does. Well, I should say Matt Derenbecker did, because once again, Matt Derenbecker is on the move.
Oh, God.
Yep, he's transferring once more. Talk that he may end up somewhere back in New Orleans. But here's the real question. Do we care?
Nope.
I mean, why should we care where he ends up? This kid was a bust in college. All that potential wasted in partying and being an idiot, turns traitor on the Tigers and flames out at Dayton?
They're better off without him, to be honest.
You know, hey, hope he turns it around, but I doubt he will.
No way.
Doubt he will. And just another guy who peaked in high school.
He wasn't sure what he was going to do about basketball, but then on his own, he contacted a few Louisiana coaches, and he got an offer at UNO. And we had a lot of long talks about, is basketball something you really think is going to be good for you at this point? And he said, yeah, I can't imagine not playing. I want to. And so he enrolled at UNO. And I remember having several meetings with the coach, who's a great guy, Schlesinger, and we were honest with him about Matt's struggles. But we didn't have the diagnosis of manic depressive. So he had several different doctors he was going to see. One of the assistant coaches would drive him to the counselor, because we did not give Matt a vehicle when he was at UNO. We just thought maybe keeping him on campus, keeping him more confined, would be something that was good for him. But he found a way around it. So it didn't take long for him to lose interest in being there. He first told us that he had a gambling issue when he was at Dayton. He called one night and said, I hate to tell you this, Mom, but I have a gambling debt. I said, what? And he said, I've been playing poker and I owe, and it was a few $100s, but he didn't have it in his account. And so I talked to my husband and I called him back and I said, Matt, we're going to pay off this gambling debt. And, you just got to stop. And what can we do to help you stop? And he said, no, I'm better. I'm not going to do that again. I realized that. Well, and we didn't hear anything else about it while he was at Dayton. So he was doing the counseling, and then we found once he came back to UNO, and then we were hearing little things. We found out he was taking a bus to downtown New Orleans and going to the casino and playing poker. And so he would win. I mean, he was good. He would read books and study it, and was obsessed with it. And he would win some and enough to keep going, keep gambling and keep going back. But then, of course, you lose some. And so I think we paid off another gambling debt. He was just having all these struggles. I think he finished that first semester at UNO, and then he stayed on for about another month, and then he quit. He just said, I don't want to do it anymore.
Wrapping up a few quick notes around the area. The Saints are locked in for the playoffs. They will visit the Philadelphia Eagles in the wild card round of the NFL playoffs after beating Tampa Bay 42-17 today. Drew Holiday helps the Pelicans finish the month of December 7-7 with 31 points in a win over Portland. LSU football getting set to take on Iowa in the Outback Bowl on January 1, with the Tigers hoping to avoid the same fate as Tulane, who finished the season with a New Orleans Bowl loss to ULL. And lastly, former Country Day star Matt Derenbecker has left the team at UNO after averaging 10.5 points and 5.6 rebounds in 11 games. That's it for sports. We'll see you back here tomorrow night.
He had another girlfriend, a sweet girl who was from Ponchatoula, and I felt like she was a good influence, really wanted nothing but good for him. One night, he called in the middle of the night, and you could tell he was totally out of it. We didn't know if he was drunk, if he had taken something, we couldn't tell, but he was not. He was just rambling, but he was crying in the middle of the night. And My husband had the phone and he just was sobbing. And John kept saying, "Where are you? Where are you?" And he said, "I don't know." And so, of course, that was just devastating because we were in the middle of the night, didn't know where he was. And then his girlfriend called us and she said that she was on her way there to get him. And we found out later that when she found him, he was like uptown running through a neighborhood, had lost his phone. And he explained it because we had him going to a psychiatrist uptown New Orleans, and the psychiatrist explained it because Matt kept insisting that he'd been drinking, that he hadn't taken anything. And the psychiatrist said, well, it's possible, that could be just drinking. But it sounded like worse to us. So anyway, we had those kind of episodes that were just so frightening. But then he dropped out of UNO, and we said, Matt, what do you want to do? We'll help you get set up somewhere, but we need to know, what is it that means something to you? What do you want? And he said, I want to live in Baton Rouge because his girlfriend was at LSU. He said, I will just find a job until I figure out what I want, and then I'll try to finish my degree somewhere or do something, So that's what we did for him. We got an apartment in Baton Rouge, and the first night we moved him in and we gave him some cash. And then we found out later that he somehow got an Uber, I don't know, got a ride, because we still didn't give him a vehicle at that point. And he got a ride to the casino in Baton Rouge and lost the money we had left him with. And then he went back to his apartment and he took all of his medicine, all of the antidepressants. And so, he might have done that, it was probably like 4 or 5 in the morning when he took those. And so he called my husband at work. He had just gotten to work, and he said that he was just kind of talking, and John could tell something was up. So John kept him on the phone, and Matt never did tell him that he had taken anything, but he was just saying things like, Dad, do you think I can turn myself around? Do you think, this? And John said he was very positive and tried to encourage him, and said, but Matt never mentioned he had lost the money or anything like that. And then Matt called his girlfriend and told her that he had taken all the medicine. And so she called an ambulance and called us. And that was that weekend that there was this huge freak ice storm where they closed down interstates, and I could not get to him in Baton Rouge, but John was able to from Hammond. And so John got to him in the hospital, and they pumped his stomach, and they said they didn't think it would have killed him because of the type of medicine, but it would have made him very, very sick. So he was, I think it was PEC'd, where you get put in the hospital for 3 days and watch, an emergency watch. He had a diagnosis of ADD and depression, which the depression was news to us because we had never seen Matt really, really low, where he couldn't get out of bed and do anything. Those telltale signs of depression, we hadn't really seen that. We knew that he wanted to stay up all night gambling and sleep all day. That was clear from his lifestyle. That's what he wanted to do. Matt would sometimes come in and his affect would be so low because he felt terrible about and I knew that, even though Matt didn't say, I feel terrible about how I'm hurting y'all, I'm disappointing y'all. He never came out and told us that at that point, but it was just, to me, that was obvious that he felt really bad about what he had done and where he was at this point. In Baton Rouge, we put him in a behavioral hospital, and he was there for a time until they thought he was stable enough to leave, and he was seeing a psychiatrist every day, but the psychiatrist wouldn't talk to us. And so we would go every night. The visiting hours were like 6 to 8, and we would go over every night, and his girlfriend went some, my sister went some once, and he might have only been there a week, but, he told us that the gambling was such an issue for him. And so I found out that there was a gambling rehab in Shreveport that would take him. I called and explained what the situation was. I said, I know he's been drinking too much. I know, certainly we know the gambling's a problem. And I said, is it a problem that he's not just a gambling addict, but he has other issues? And they said, oh no, every gambling addict has other issues. And so he told us, how to get him in, and we did. And my husband went and got him and drove him to Shreveport. The papers that he brought back, the discharge papers, said there was one line that said possible bipolar. And he prescribed a medication that was a treatment for bipolar. It wasn't lithium. I think it was gabapentin, which is used for a lot of things, but one of them is treating bipolar. But we never were told that it was bipolar, but that was a possibility. So he went for 6 weeks to the gambling rehab, and John and I would go every weekend for family time. His affect was kind of down then. He did not like it there, but he knew he needed it, he said. And so they did like the AA meetings, and yeah, we participated in those when we went. And that was really eye-opening to see Matt in that setting. We would write letters back and forth during the week, and his girlfriend stayed in touch with him. But he was very glad to get out, but he seemed down when he got out. And when we went to get him, my husband and I both picked him up. And when we were discharging him, the lady at the desk, who had been a gambling addict herself, she was just in recovery, but she was an older lady. And I kind of tried to prod her and say, do you think he's going to be all right? Do you think he's, on the right track? And she just shook his head and said, he's a hard case. And so that scared me.
Pete Rose.
Michael Jordan.
Phil Mickelson in the news this week as yet another athlete dealing with gambling struggles. We'll have more in our next segment, brought to you by FanDuel and BetMGM.
So we were back in Hammond. He was living with us, and they gave us really strict guidelines to follow. Like, he couldn't have cash more than $2. He was supposed to go to GA, Gamblers Anonymous. He was supposed to go to meetings every day. Just really strict guidelines. And so he hated that. He fought that. And they said, if you can't find enough GA meetings to go to, you can go to AA meetings. And while he was actually in the rehab in Shreveport, we found locally in Hammond and in Baton Rouge Gam-Anon meetings for families of gamblers. And so we started going to those, and lots of great people that were really trying to help. We found a gambling counselor, a psychologist in Baton Rouge, and we scheduled appointments for us to go to see her, and also for Matt to go to see her. And Matt hated it because she was pretty hardcore, and Matt hated going to her. So that didn't last. But he did go to meetings for several months and got some little jobs that none of them seemed to really hold his interest for long. I know he talked to the basketball coaches at Southeastern one time, and he broke down in front of them. They told me that he cried and said he felt terrible for how he had messed up, is what he called it. I was supposed to get his paychecks, and his employer agreed to that. Well, then he told his employer he didn't agree to that anymore. And so the bookkeeper called me, who was also a family friend, and called me and told me that Matt was not willing to give us his checks anymore for us to hold for him and give him money as needed. And she said, I wanted you to know that. And I said, okay. And so then it was clear he was starting to gamble again some. One morning I got up at like 5:30 and his car was gone. And then I saw him pull up, and he had like a bag of McDonald's breakfast food in it. And he said, oh, I just left the house to go get breakfast. And I knew that wasn't true. I knew he had not been home that night, and he was just coming in. And I just pretended, I just said, oh, okay. And then he went and got in my bed. I remember, because my bed was empty, and he just crashed because he had been up all night gambling. And while he was sleeping, his wallet was on the bedside table, and I went through his wallet, and he had like $100 bills, brand new, that he had gotten that night from gambling, from playing poker. And we told him that, Matt, our arrangement when you left the gambling rehab was that you were going to have to abide by certain guidelines, and if you couldn't, that we should not enable you. We should not let you stay here. And he said, I know, I need to go. And so we said, well, let's give it some time and think about it. But he started not showing up for work some. And anyway, he talked to his girlfriend's parents, and they agreed to let him live with them. They said, we're going to work on him. We're going to help him. And so we agreed to that. And he went and lived with them, and he worked for a while, but he was not going to any counseling at that point. And so then in August, that's when he
August 10th, 2014. Good morning, and here's some of our top stories today. Israel and Palestine have agreed to a 72-hour ceasefire brokered by Egypt, which is set to begin this evening. Meanwhile, protests in Ferguson, Missouri have begun to turn violent following the police shooting of teenager Michael Brown. And in sports, Rory McIlroy wins the PGA Championship, his second consecutive major victory and fourth overall. What else could today have in store for us? We'll see.
His girlfriend's family had gone on a family trip to China, and they were gone for, 10 days or something. And Matt was house sitting, taking care of their animals. And so they had agreed that he was going to pick them up at the airport in New Orleans when they returned, and he didn't show up. And so they called me, and I went to the house, and it was clear what had happened because I saw that the dad was a hunter and he had some guns. And so I saw that the gun case was open in their bedroom and that the case for the gun was out on the bed. He actually shot himself beside their pool, and he fell into the pool. That's when he killed himself.
Our top story tonight.
Breaking news out of Ponchatoula.
Shocking and tragic report as former Country Day basketball star and LSU player Matt Derenbecker was found dead in a pool in Ponchatoula this morning, 3 weeks shy of his 23rd birthday. No immediate cause of death has been reported at this time. Derenbecker was a standout player and top college recruit during his time at Country Day and played one season for LSU. He spent another season playing at Dayton before finishing his career last season at UNO. We will have more information on this story as it becomes available.
It was heartbreaking and gut-wrenching and still is, but it also was something that I had felt building. I felt like I had grieved Matt since the beginning of his senior year of high school. I felt like I had begun the grieving process because I just didn't see a good outcome possible. He never stuck with counseling long enough for there to be an official diagnosis, I guess. And then when he did get a possible diagnosis and was taking medication, his demeanor was different. He was not the, laughing, happy Matt, and he hated it. And he wasn't willing to work with that and work with doctors and figure out the right medication. I think he felt like it was hopeless. When he did attempt several times, or at least once, and talked about it enough to scare his coaches at Dayton before that. So I think he had been pondering it for a while. But the night before he died, he went to a fantasy football meeting with some friends in Hammond. When they did the blood test they have to do after a death, he had alcohol in his system, that he didn't have anything else, not even his medicine he was supposed to be taking, but he did have alcohol in his system. And I've read a lot about bipolar since this, when he showed the classic symptoms. We did not see a lot of the depression, but I think he masked that with drinking. I think that that's when he would drink the most. But at the end, I am consoled by the fact that Matt, he never physically hurt anyone else. Yeah, he hurt himself. I know that he drove intoxicated at times, but fortunately never hurt anyone. And he did have a lot of people in his life who loved him. And his girlfriend at the end was a great girl. He had a lot of people supporting him. And a lot of those people, though, he didn't really want to be around as much at the end because I know he was dealing with so much guilt and shame. Shame was the thing that we learned in Gam-Anon that is so destructive. But that is so common. That's one of the biggest, and you may have experienced this too. You just feel so terrible about what you're doing, but it just seems to be out of control and something beyond your control at times. So I think that without Matt, and I don't know if Matt was capable of making a decision to stick with counseling, to stick with experimenting with the medicine until we could find something that worked. Because certainly people are able to live with bipolar, but he just didn't seem to even want to go there. My oldest son, he's real stoic, and so he doesn't talk a whole lot about it. He wasn't shocked, and he told me that. He said, "Mom, this doesn't shock me." Well, later, like a month later. We all fell apart right at first, but he told me later, he said, I'm just not shocked. And he was already married. He'd been married less than a year, I guess. No, a little over a year. And so he had a wonderful wife to lean on. My youngest son, Parker, he was probably a little closer to Matt. They had hung out together more. Parker, took it really hard, and we had some hard times after that, but we never stopped talking about Matt. It's never been something we don't want to talk about. We talk about it a lot, him a lot, and what we remember, our funny memories and our sad memories. And so I think that's been good, that we all talk about him a lot. In fact, Matt would have been 32 in August, and so Parker is married now, and his wife threw a birthday party for Matt, and it was just us, just our family, but so we still talk about him, and he's very much a part of our lives, and the grandkids have seen pictures of him, and he's Uncle Matt. So he said he'll be always loved and remembered. My husband's, we separated about 1.5 years after Matt's death, but we're very close friends. He recently moved from Metairie back to Ponchatoula, and I've helped him move. We tell each other we're always going to be family. But I don't think that Matt's death caused us to separate. I had a wonderful counselor who knew Matt personally because he had played baseball with her sons. And so I would see her regularly, and that helped a lot. I also joined a group called Cracked Pots, which is based in Baton Rouge, and it's for mothers who have lost children. I went to the local Methodist church. The minister at my church, when he met with us to even plan the funeral, he said, I lost a brother to suicide. When I told him that I had been grieving for 5 years because of the path that Matt had been on, he said, is there any way that you can find it in you to honor Matt's decision? And part of me just felt like that was a burden off my shoulders, because that's how I felt. I felt like, Matt, you're going through something I cannot understand, but only you can go through it. And you know what you feel and what this has done to you. I don't know, it maybe lifted some shame from me, that because I felt judged by some people, even though most people were wonderful. But having this minister that I really respected say, try to honor his decision. And he's also said, Matt's going to send you gifts. He said he's going to send you signs and messages. But he made us feel so much better. And so that's kind of where I am still, is my heart hurts for anybody who's dealing with addiction. And I feel like it's taken away any judgment. I never was a real judgmental person, I don't think, but it definitely took away that. Sorry.
Now, this is truly awful news out of Ponchatoula.
Horrible.
We've always been big fans of Matt Derenbecker here on our program. Our hearts go out to his family, his parents, and brothers, and all that. We've never wished anything but the best for him, and will continue to do so in this tragic time.
No doubt. No.
But whenever something like this happens, you just have to ask yourself why. Why would someone feel that this was the solution? That this was his way out?
It makes no sense.
All the people you leave behind. How could someone get that far down? I just don't understand it.
My name is Janell Kalifey. There are people and athletes who have had like an undiagnosed difficulty for maybe quite a while. It can be a slow burn for people who then get to where they see suicide as the only option, or they feel like there's such a burden that this is the only thing that they can do to alleviate the burden they're putting on other people, like their family. It's hard for you and I, as we're sitting here talking about this, to even imagine what is in someone's mind who is in that state, because your mind has changed, right? When you get to that point where you're that depressed, that hopeless, where that is the option you come up with. And it's tragic. I think we're seeing it more with athletes, I think, because of all the pressures and the things that we're talking about.
When he was in Dayton, there was a website that I don't remember the name of it, but it solely is for the purpose of talking about Dayton athletics. And I remember when he signed there, that this site was talking about, there must be something wrong with him if he's leaving LSU. And then when he got there, and it had some pretty raunchy things on it, it started dropping a lot of hints that he was a big partier, in that he was drinking a lot, and that if he didn't have a good game, it was because he was hungover, those kind of things. So it got negative, very negative. I was a really talented athlete as a child, and I can remember he played on this little rec league, And they were in a tight game, and I overheard the coach tell him during a timeout, okay, Matt, you take over. And he was like 10. And I remember saying, oh, this is so unhealthy. This is not a good thing to be telling a kid that he's responsible now for this outcome of this game. You take over, and just things like that. And then when kids would come up to him and say, oh, you're going to be in the NBA one day. And I just would try to get him out of that environment as fast as I can, because I always knew that that was not healthy. And the more that social media became prevalent, I knew that there was just so much bad stuff out there. I think we do need to think about the microscope we put on the lives of athletes and anybody who's in the limelight. And I think that we got to realize they're people. And I think Matt was, at times, he could seem so strong as an athlete that people didn't pay attention to the vulnerability and didn't think about their words and actions. So I think that's one thing we need to be better about, is that if you're not okay emotionally and mentally, then the sports, it's not going to end well, because emotional and mental health is crucial just to exist. And Matt didn't have that. And so I think that we can also show a lot more grace, a lot more kindness for mess ups, and try to be helpful and not critical and condemning and judgmental.
Good evening. Tonight we're taking a look at suicide rates in the U.S. One of the leading causes of death in the country every year, suicide rates saw a 37% increase from 2000 to 2018, before declining by 5% from 2018 to 2020. However, suicide rates have since returned to 2018 numbers in the years since the pandemic. Just under 50,000 people died by suicide in 2022, according to the CDC, with more than 39,000 of those suicides coming from men. In 2021, 12.3 million adults reported having serious suicidal thoughts, 3.5 million made a plan, and 1.7 million actually attempted suicide. Of the roughly 49,000 suicides in 2022, over 37,000 of them were identified as white, 32,000 more than the second leading group, Hispanic Latinos. The suicide rate of 17.4 per every 100,000 white people was the second highest rate after Native Americans, which was reported at a staggering 28.1 per 100,000. In recent years, however, there's been a 20% increase in suicides among the Black population and a 26% increase in Native suicides, while suicides among the white population have decreased, albeit by just 3.9%. Notably, the elderly community had the highest rate regardless of race, with 22.4 in 100,000 suicides reported in people 85 and up, and a rate of 19.6 for people between 75 to 84. However, the third highest group just behind that, with a rate of 19.5, was 25 to 34-year-olds. Ages 35 to 54 weren't far behind at 18.2, with 15 to 24-year-olds coming at 15.2, a decrease in recent years. However, suicide is the second leading cause of death among college students, with men 3 times as likely to die by suicide. The 11th leading cause of death overall in the country. It's the second leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 10 to 14 and 25 to 34, and the third leading cause of death for 15 to 24-year-olds. It's also the second leading cause of death for college athletes. Of 1,102 NCAA athlete deaths from 2002 to 2022, 11.6% of them came by suicide. However, in 2002, the percentage of deaths by suicide was 7.6%. In 2022, that percentage increased to 15.3%. As these trends increase across the country, we can only ask, what can be done? How can we possibly stop these ever-increasing numbers?
I think an important thing is that if people are on teams and they see an athlete becoming withdrawn or acting differently, or even saying things like, I don't want to be here anymore, sometimes those comments maybe aren't taken as seriously as maybe they ought to be. Even some mental health practitioners can be fearful about talking directly about suicide with someone who's depressed, as though if we talk about it or if we say the word, we're going to put the idea in their head. So there's a tiptoeing around it sometimes. But the research shows the exact opposite, that they're no more likely to attempt suicide because you've asked them about, are you feeling suicidal? Or do you have thoughts of hurting yourself? So I think we need to get more comfortable talking about it.
My name is Dr. Janet Finlayson. In many ways, being an athlete can be a protective factor against suicide. Does that mean that it doesn't happen? No, absolutely not. When it comes to suicide, what we know is that there is never just one thing. There's always a multitude of factors that are at play, a lot of things that have contributed, and it's just really hard for us to ever predict who it's going to happen to. So what we have to do instead is like, how do we build up a system where there's resilience, we have support, we're able to talk about our problems, we're able to reach out when we need help. And that's whether they're an athlete or not an athlete, destigmatizing mental health, talking about when you're struggling, it's okay for you to get help. Make sure to have avenues within your organizations or your teams where people know that they can get help and they're not going to be punished for it, or they're not going to lose their membership on the team or whatever it is. I think a lot of people, when the stakes get really high, one thing that we do know with athletes is that they may become less likely to reach out for help because they are worried about what would be the consequences. And so then they kind of feel like they have to handle it all on their own, and then they become isolated and it becomes more and more difficult. So again, just within that broad perspective of normalizing reaching out for help. Mental health is just like going to the dentist, just like going to the doctor for a checkup. It's okay for you to check in and talk about how you're feeling. And if you're not feeling well, then it's okay to go in and get help for that.
I think that using resources like counseling, and I think the AA groups can be good, Gamma-Non or GA and all those groups can be good. I think using those resources is important. I think that doing a lot of reading about what the loved one is going through is important. And I will always be grateful that we never shut Matt out, even when we agreed that it wasn't a good idea for him to live in our house anymore. It was done out of love and saying that, Matt, this isn't working for you. And he agreed that it wasn't working for him, but just never withholding love. I think that's a hard call about when does it become enabling. But if you have bipolar, you need a big support group. You need a lot of people around you that can help. But when you have a person like Matt who said, I'm done with counseling, I am not going back, and he did say that, then your hands are tied. You don't know what to do then. He said, I'm done with the medicine, I'm done with the counseling. Then it's just a hard thing. But so as far as advice, I really don't have good advice because I don't know answers. I think every time that I hear mental health issues in the news, I am grateful that it's getting more attention. We got to lose the stigma. We have to lose the stigma of mental health being something we don't talk about. It's no different than a physical ailment, except that it's harder to diagnose and it's harder to treat. So other than still taking care of yourself and not becoming, because I told my other children, and even in high school, I said, Matt is going through a terrible time, but I want you to know I'm still your mom too.
Losing someone to suicide is a very particular type of grief that in some ways is different than losing someone by other means. And so there are groups that are specifically designed to offer support to family members or teammates or people in the community who've lost somebody to suicide. And I always encourage people, really connect with those groups, because it's something that you never want to have in common with someone else, but once you do, they can understand that loss in a very different way than people who have experienced loss, which is tough, but just not in the same way. When I'm working with individuals, either parents or teammates, or if an athlete has had a family member that they've lost to suicide, there's a lot of things to kind of approach, but one of the most important things that I try to help people to understand is that it's not their fault, and that it's okay for you, whatever feelings you're having, all of those things are okay. And the desire to have some answers is human nature for us to kind of want to figure it out. And in many ways, I think the difficulty is that sometimes you might not know all of the answers to that. And that kind of also compounds the pain. And so reach out, get support, When you're ready, if you want, use some of that and fuel it in a way that can be helpful, joining foundations, starting foundations, increasing awareness. Using some of that towards advocacy or mental health can kind of help you to feel like you're using some of that in a productive way, can also be helpful in terms of healing.
It is tragic. It's sad. It's heartbreaking. My husband did have a dream a few days after Matt's funeral, and he said it was a nightmare, but it actually put him in this physical and mental state. He felt like he had Matt's depression and Matt's bipolar, his depression, that part of it. And he said it was the most painful thing he had ever experienced. And he woke up in tears and he said, I think I just got a glimpse of what Matt was going through. And he felt like it was a gift from Matt. Dad, this is what I was living with. So Matt does send us gifts still. I feel like I'll get a memory that he was just so full of life until the end. I'm grateful. When somebody mentions Matt, sometimes I still cry, but usually I smile. So that's a gift.
Pressure, addiction, toxic fandom, inequality, suicide. These are things that can make those among us that often appear to be the strongest sometimes feel the weakest. When the fans head for the exit and the lights go out, athletes are just as human as anyone else. Often, when the lights go out, they're dealing with more than we can ever imagine. And sometimes, just like Matt, they can feel like the only way out is to turn the lights out for good. The past 5 episodes have dealt with various aspects of mental health as they apply to the field of athletics. At times, I know it's been hard to hear or accept. Sometimes, it's enough to make you feel like there's nothing you can do. I want you to know that's not the case. There are staunch realities that can't be changed, yes. Addiction will always exist, there will always be bullying, and sadly, there will always be people who end up thinking suicide is the only way out. It doesn't mean there aren't things we can do to make things better. We've talked about a few of them in each episode, but in the final episode of this podcast, I want to focus on what's already being done to improve things, what's in our power to do moving forward, and what else you, I, and others can do to make things better. When the Lights Go Out was written, directed, produced, and edited by me, Hart Pisani. The talking heads were voiced by Alan Roberson and Preston Moore. The newscasters were voiced by Sophia Barrett, Alex Sharp, and Craig Sperry. The logo was designed by Kayla Goforth. The interviews were recorded using Zoom. The episode was pieced together using Descript and published using Spotify for podcasters. Special thanks to Preston Moore, Jared Lyons, and Alex Sharp. Next up, the final episode, All Together Now.